The dining room table was set for 12 people. I knew this because I counted the plates from the photo Ashley uploaded to her social media. 12 white plates with napkins folded into star shapes. 12 crystal glasses reflecting the lights of the Christmas tree. It was December 24th, and I was sitting in my living room, phone in hand, staring at that image like it was a riddle I couldn't solve. There was a turkey. There were candles. There were golden garlands hanging from the ceiling. There was laughter in the comments section. But there was no place for me. There had been no fight, no argument, not even an uncomfortable phone call where they told me this year would be different. They simply stopped answering my texts. I wrote to Ashley 3 weeks prior, asking what time they wanted me to come over. I saw the 2 blue check marks indicating it was red. Silence. I wrote to her again a week later, offering to bring dessert like I always did. Read receipts again. Nothing else. I called 2 days before Christmas Eve. The phone rang until it went to voicemail. I left a short message, nothing dramatic, just asking if everything was okay. She never returned the call, so there I was, on the most important night of the year, watching my daughter celebrate with my son-in-law, Brian. With the kids, with their friends, with people I didn't even know. I zoomed in on the photo. I searched for my reflection in some corner of that perfect table. Maybe they had saved me a seat, and I just couldn't see it from the camera angle. But no, I counted again. 12 plates, 12 people. I was not included in that number. I turned off my phone and placed it face down on the coffee table. The house was too quiet. I had made some dinner for myself, nothing elaborate, just some roast chicken with vegetables. I thought about eating it in front of the TV, but the idea seemed so sad that I preferred to leave it in the fridge. I wasn't hungry anyway. I had something worse. I had that feeling that appears when you know something has changed, but nobody has explained what it was. I got up and walked to the window. Outside, the neighbors' houses had their lights on. I could hear distant music, voices, the sound of families gathered together. I had spent 35 Christmases with Ashley, from the time she was born until this moment. 35 dinners, 35 mornings opening gifts, 35 times cooking, decorating, organizing, making sure everything was perfect for her. And now, at 61 years old, I was alone looking out the window like a stranger in my own life. I tried to remember if I had done something wrong. Maybe I said something inappropriate the last time we saw each other. Maybe I complained too much. Maybe I was too pushy with the grandkids. I replayed every recent conversation in my head, looking for the crack, the exact moment where everything broke. But I found nothing. Only the same chats as always, the same questions about how they were doing, the same offers of help I always made. Because that was what I did. Help. When Ashley wanted to go to medical school, I worked double shifts at the store to pay for the private university she wanted so badly. I never asked her to pay me back. When she married Brian, I paid for half the reception, even though they never asked me to. I just wanted her to have the perfect day. When the kids were born, I was the one who was there the first few weeks, sleeping on their couch, getting up in the early hours to help her with the night feedings. I never expected a medal for that. I was just doing what mothers do. But now I wondered if maybe that had been the problem. Maybe I gave too much. Maybe I became invisible from being so constantly available. People stop valuing what is always there, like air, like sunlight, necessary, but forgettable. I picked up my phone again. I had a new notification. For a second, my heart jumped, thinking it was Ashley. But no, it was a promotional email from a department store offering me end-of-year discounts. I deleted the message and looked at the empty screen. Not even a message from Brian, nor from the kids. No one. I sat back down on the sofa and closed my eyes. I felt that pressure in my chest that appears right before crying. But I didn't let the tears come out. I wasn't going to do that. I wasn't going to become the pathetic mother crying alone on Christmas. Instead, I took a deep breath and let the silence wrap around me. And in that silence, something changed inside me. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was something colder and clearer. It was the realization that I had built my entire life around being needed. And now that they didn't need me, I didn't know who I was. I opened my eyes and looked around my living room. The same house where I had lived for the last 25 years. The same furniture, the same beige curtains Ashley had chosen when she was 15, the same photographs on the walls, almost all of them of her graduation, her wedding, the kids. I looked for a photo of just me and found none. Not a single image where I was the protagonist of my own life. I stood up again, but this time with a different purpose. I went to my bedroom and pulled an old box from the top shelf of the closet. Inside were my important documents, the deed to the house, certificates, and something else. A manila envelope with the bank statements from my only savings account. I opened it and checked the balance. $420,000. I had been saving for years without a clear goal, just saving for the sake of saving, in case Ashley needed something, in case an emergency came up. But looking at that number on the paper, I had a thought I'd never had before. What if I used that money for myself? What if, for the first time in decades, I did something completely selfish? The idea scared me and excited me at the same time. I put the papers back in the box, but not in the closet. I left them on my dresser where I could see them. That night, instead of crying over not being invited to Christmas dinner, I stayed awake, thinking about what kind of life I could build if I finally started living for me. I didn't know it yet, but that silent decision I made in the solitude of my room was going to change everything. And Ashley, who at that moment was toasting with champagne surrounded by her guests, had no idea she had just lost something much more valuable than my presence at her table. She had just lost my unconditional devotion, and very soon she was going to discover that came with a price she wasn't prepared to pay. 3 weeks passed before I made the final decision. 3 weeks, where every morning I woke up with that same strange sensation of freedom mixed with pain. Ashley never called to explain anything. She didn't even send a New Year's text. It was as if she had closed a door, and, on the other side, I had simply ceased to exist. And in a way, that freed me from a guilt I didn't even know I was carrying. The guilt of having to be always available. One afternoon in mid-January, I was drinking coffee in the kitchen when I saw an ad in the newspaper. A small house facing the ocean, 2 hours from the city. The price was reasonable, $380,000. It had 2 bedrooms, a porch with an ocean view, and came completely furnished. The photo showed a modest structure, painted cream with coffee-colored shutters. It wasn't luxurious, but it had something that caught my attention. It looked like a place where someone could start over. I called the number in the ad without thinking too much. A male voice answered. It was the owner directly, a man named Tom, who explained he was moving up north for work and needed to sell fast. He offered to show me the property that same weekend. I accepted. I didn't tell anyone I was going. I simply took my car on Saturday morning and drove toward the coast. The drive was more beautiful than I expected. I left behind the gray and noisy city, and little by little the landscape opened up into green hills and then into that infinite line where the sky touches the water. It had been years since I went anywhere alone. There was always someone who needed something. There was always a reason to stay close. But now, with the windows down and the salty air coming into the car, I realized how much I had missed this kind of silence. The silence that doesn't hurt. The silence that just exists. I arrived at the address just past noon. The house was exactly like the photo, only smaller and more charming. It was on a quiet street, less than 50 yards from the beach. Tom was waiting for me on the porch. He was a man of about 50, with graying hair and a kind smile. He shook my hand and invited me in. The interior smelled of wood and salt. The furniture was simple but well cared for. There was a small living room with large windows that let in all the light from the sea. The kitchen was vintage but functional. The bedrooms were modest, with wrought iron beds and light wood wardrobes. But what I really fell in love with was the back porch. From there you could see the entire ocean, stretching as far as the eye could see. There was an old rocking chair and a small table. I imagined myself sitting there at sunrise, drinking coffee, without having to rush to attend to anyone but myself. Tom let me walk through the house alone. He didn't pressure me. He didn't fill the air with unnecessary words. He just told me to take my time. And that's what I did. I touched the walls. I opened the windows. I stood in every corner feeling if this place could be mine. And at some moment, while I was on the porch looking at the sea, I knew the answer. This place was already mine. I just needed to sign for it. I went back inside and told Tom I wanted to buy it. He seemed surprised by the speed of my decision, but he didn't ask questions. He explained that we needed to handle some legal paperwork, that it was important to have everything registered correctly to avoid future problems. He recommended a lawyer in the area, a man named Mr. Henderson, who specialized in coastal properties. He also suggested, almost casually, that I install security cameras. He said that with beach houses it was always a good idea to have surveillance in case of issues with strangers or trespassing. At that moment, it seemed like an exaggeration, but I nodded anyway. 2 weeks later, I returned to the house with all the papers signed. Mr. Henderson, the lawyer, had taken care of reviewing every detail. He was a meticulous man, about 65 years old, with thick glasses and a deliberate way of speaking that conveyed confidence. He explained that everything was in order, that the property had no liens or debts, that the title was clean. He handed me a folder with certified copies of everything. He told me something that stuck with me. He said that many older people were victims of real estate fraud by family members who assumed they didn't understand legal procedures. He looked me straight in the eyes and told me to keep those documents in a safe place and to never sign anything without consulting him first. I nodded, never imagining how important that advice would be. The house was now officially mine. $380,000 of my savings had turned into a refuge by the sea. I didn't tell Ashley. I didn't tell anyone. I simply started visiting on weekends, bringing my things little by little. Clothes, books, some old photographs from when I was young, from when I still had dreams of my own. Tom was living in the house next door while he finished packing his things. We became friends without intending to. He taught me where the best bakery in town was, which days the fishermen arrived with the freshest catch, what time was best to walk on the beach to avoid the crowds. He didn't ask questions about my life. He didn't need to know why a 61-year-old woman had bought a house alone by the sea. He simply accepted my presence as something natural. One afternoon, while drinking lemonade on his porch, he asked if I had family nearby. I told him I had a daughter. He stayed quiet for a moment, and then said something simple. He said that sometimes the family we choose is more real than the one we get by blood. I didn't respond, but his words stayed with me. I installed the security cameras as he had suggested. 2 in the front, 1 in the back, another at the main entrance. The technician taught me how to view them from my phone. It seemed excessive to have my own house under surveillance like a bank, but there was something reassuring about knowing everything was being recorded. The first 2 months in the house were the most peaceful I had lived in years. I woke up to the sound of seagulls. I walked barefoot on the sand. I read books I had bought and never opened. I cooked only for myself, in the exact amounts I needed, without leftovers to store, thinking about who might need them. I learned to enjoy my own company. I learned that solitude and abandonment are not the same thing. But calm never lasts forever. One afternoon in March, while I was watering the plants on the porch, my phone rang. It was a number I hadn't seen on my screen in almost 4 months. It was Ashley. My first instinct was not to answer, to let it ring until she got tired. But something in me, maybe the habit of so many years, made me slide my finger and answer. Her voice sounded strangely sweet, too sweet. She asked me how I was, as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't cut me out of her life without a single explanation. I told her I was fine. There was an uncomfortable pause. Then came the real reason for her call. She asked if I still had the property documents in my name. She asked if I had made any legal changes recently. She asked where I kept my important papers. Something cold ran down my spine. These weren't casual questions. They were questions with intent. I told her everything was in order, that she didn't have to worry. She insisted. She said she just wanted to make sure I was okay, that I wasn't being tricked, that I had everything under control. But her tone wasn't one of concern. It was urgency, need. I ended the call with a vague excuse and stood there, phone in hand, feeling that something was about to break. I didn't know what exactly, but I felt it coming. Ashley's call left me unsettled for days. I couldn't get the tone of her voice out of my head, that forced sweetness she used when she wanted something but didn't dare ask for it directly. I knew her too well. It was the same voice she used as a teenager when she needed extra money or when she had broken something and was trying to soften the blow before confessing. But now we were adults, and the questions she had asked weren't from a daughter worried about her mother. They were from someone taking inventory. I tried to continue with my routine at the beach house. I got up early, walked along the shore, made my breakfast in that small kitchen that felt more mine every day. But there was a new shadow over everything, a feeling that the peace I had built was more fragile than I thought. Tom noticed my change in mood. One morning, while sharing coffee on my porch, he asked if everything was okay. I told him about the call. Without giving too many details, he just nodded and told me something that made me think. He said that when someone disappears from your life for months and suddenly returns asking questions about your assets, it's never a coincidence. He said to be careful. I decided to call Mr. Henderson, the lawyer. I explained the situation. He listened in silence and then asked me to come to his office. I went that same afternoon. His office was a small but tidy place, full of metal filing cabinets and stacks of perfectly labeled folders. He offered me a seat and looked at me with that seriousness found only in people who have seen too many family tragedies disguised as legal procedures. He asked if I had ever signed any document giving power of attorney to Ashley over my properties. I told him no, never. He asked if she had access to my bank accounts. I told him no, everything was solely in my name. He asked if I kept all the original documents for my properties in a safe place. I told him yes, that everything was in a small safe I had in my bedroom in the city. Mr. Henderson nodded but didn't look completely at ease. He told me that often real estate fraud began with forged documents, with imitated signatures, with people taking advantage of the fact that older adults didn't always check every paper put in front of them. He handed me an envelope. Inside was a notarized document certifying my full mental and legal capacity to manage my assets. He explained it was a protection, that if anyone tried to argue I wasn't fit to make decisions, this paper demonstrated otherwise. He also gave me his personal card and asked me to call him immediately if Ashley or anyone else tried to pressure me to sign something. He said he would be available at any time. I left his office feeling more protected, but also more scared, because now the threat that had been just an intuition had a name: fraud, appropriation, dispossession. I went back to the beach house that night and checked every security camera. They were all working perfectly. The images were recorded automatically to the cloud, and I could access them from my phone. I felt ridiculous for a moment, like I was exaggerating, like I was being paranoid. But then I remembered Ashley's voice asking about my documents, and the ridiculousness turned into caution. 2 weeks of silence passed. I started to think maybe I had misinterpreted everything, that maybe Ashley had just called out of genuine curiosity, that maybe I was projecting my pain of abandonment onto conspiracy theories that had no foundation. But then, one Saturday morning, while I was at the beach house reading on the porch, I heard the sound of a car pulling up in front of my driveway. I got up and looked out the window. It was a car I didn't recognize, a shiny, new gray sedan. From the driver's seat, Brian got out. From the passenger seat, Ashley got out. And from the back seat, a woman I didn't know got out, dressed in a sand-colored suit and high heels, completely inappropriate for the beach. She carried a leather portfolio and large sunglasses. She had the exact look of a real estate agent. My heart started beating faster. They hadn't warned me they were coming. They hadn't asked for permission. They had simply shown up. I went out to the porch before they knocked on the door. Ashley saw me and smiled, but it was a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She greeted me with a kiss on the cheek that felt like ice. Brian barely looked at me. The woman extended her hand and introduced herself. Her name was Sarah. She was a realtor, and she was there to appraise my property. I felt the ground move beneath my feet. I asked them what was going on, why they had come without warning, why there was a broker in my house. Ashley took my hand with that condescending softness people use when talking to someone they consider confused. She told me not to worry, that they just wanted to help me, that they had been thinking about my situation and realized I had too many properties to manage alone at my age. She said it was too much responsibility, too much stress, that it would be better to sell some things and simplify my life. I told her I didn't want to sell anything, that I was perfectly fine managing my properties, that I didn't need her help. Brian intervened for the first time. His voice was firm, almost authoritative. He said I wasn't seeing the big picture, that keeping a beach house was expensive, that taxes were going to go up, that maintenance was complicated, that at my age I should be resting, not worrying about repairs and payments. It sounded reasonable. It sounded logical. But there was something rotten beneath those words. Sarah, the realtor, started walking around the house without asking permission. She was taking notes on a tablet, taking photos, measuring spaces with a laser device. I followed her, trying to understand what was happening. I asked her who had authorized her to be there. She looked at me with a professional smile and told me Ashley had contacted her, that she had explained her mother needed help liquidating some assets, that it was a normal process, that she was just doing her job. I went back to the living room where Ashley and Brian were waiting. I told them clearly that I was not going to sell my house, that it was mine, that I had bought it with my money, that no one had the right to come here and decide what to do with it. Ashley sighed as if I were a difficult child. She told me she understood I was confused, that it was normal at my age to feel overwhelmed by major decisions. That was why they were there, to help me make the right decision. Brian pulled a folder from his briefcase. Inside were papers. A lot of papers. He showed them to me quickly, too quickly for me to read them well. He said they were documents that simplified everything, that if I signed there, they would take care of selling the property, handling the money, ensuring I was well taken care of. He said they had even found an interested buyer who was willing to close the deal fast. He didn't mention who that buyer was. He didn't mention the price. He just pushed the papers toward me with a pen. I didn't touch them. I told them I wasn't going to sign anything, that if they wanted to talk about this, we could do it with my lawyer present. Ashley's expression changed. The sweetness vanished. She asked me since when did I have a lawyer. I told her since I bought this house. Everything legal, everything registered, everything under my name. I saw something in her eyes I had never seen before. It wasn't concern. It was frustration. She was annoyed because I wasn't following the script she had planned. Sarah returned from her walkthrough. She told Ashley the property was in good condition, that the market value was around $600,000. Ashley nodded. Brian wrote something on his phone. I stood there, in my own house, feeling like an intruder in my own life. I asked them to leave. Ashley tried to protest, but I raised my voice for the first time in a long time. I told them to get off my property, that they had no right to be there, that I wasn't going to sell anything. They left, but not before exchanging glances with Sarah, not before leaving the papers on my table, as if it were only a matter of time before I caved. When the gray car disappeared down the road, I stayed standing on the porch, shaking, not from fear but from rage. Rage at having been so naive. Rage at having believed my daughter had simply forgotten me at Christmas out of carelessness. This wasn't forgetfulness. This was strategy. They had excluded me because it was easier to act when I wasn't around, when I couldn't see what they were planning. I went inside and called Mr. Henderson. I told him everything. He told me to do exactly what I had done. Don't sign anything, don't yield. He told me to check the camera recordings and save them as evidence. He said this probably wasn't over. He was right. This was just beginning. I spent the whole night awake, sitting in the living room of my beach house, with all the lights on, reviewing the security camera footage on my phone over and over. There they were, Ashley, Brian, and Sarah entering my property as if it were theirs. Sarah taking photos of every corner, Brian with those papers in his hand, Ashley with that fake smile that now seemed poisonous to me. Everything was recorded, every word, every gesture. I saved the videos in 3 different places. On my phone, on my computer, and on a USB drive I hid inside an old book on my bookshelf. The next morning, I returned to my house in the city. I needed to check my original documents, make sure everything was in order. I opened the safe in my bedroom and took out the folder where I kept the deeds to my properties. I had 2. The house where I lived, which I had bought with my husband 25 years ago, and which was now solely mine since he died, and the beach house, recently acquired, fully paid for. I checked every page. Everything was correct. Everything was in my name. No one had a claim on anything. But as I was putting the papers back, I found something that froze my blood. At the bottom of the box was a document I didn't remember seeing before. It was a request for power of attorney, a letter of authority. It was half-filled, with my name printed at the top, with blank spaces where my signature and the notary's should go. The document granted full legal power over all my properties to whoever was designated as the agent. The agent's space was empty, but the form was there, ready to be completed. I felt nauseous. I hadn't printed that document. I hadn't asked for any power of attorney. The only thing that occurred to me was that someone had entered my house. Someone had been in my room. Someone had left that paper there waiting for the right moment. I checked the print date in the bottom corner. 3 weeks ago. Just after Ashley's call asking about my documents, I took the paper and tore it into small pieces. Then I took the pieces and burned them in the kitchen sink until nothing remained but black ash. I called a locksmith, and that same afternoon I changed all the locks on my house. Ashley had a copy of the keys. I had given them to her years ago, in case an emergency arose. Now those keys were useless. I also called Mr. Henderson and told him about the document. He remained silent for a long moment. Then he told me something that terrified me. He told me that what they had tried to do was called misappropriation by deception. That if I had signed that paper without reading it well, without understanding what it said, Ashley and Brian would have had legal power to sell my properties without my consent. He told me it was a serious crime, that it happened more often than people believed, that many families destroyed their elders this way, hiding it behind words like help, protection, care. 5 days passed without news from Ashley. 5 days where I lived in constant alert, waiting for the next move. I went back to the beach house because in the city I felt watched, exposed. Tom had already moved completely up north, but before leaving he left me his phone number and told me to call him if I needed anything. He also left me the contact of his trusted neighbors, people from the town he had known for years. One afternoon, while I was making some dinner, I heard voices outside. I looked out the window and saw a car parked in front of my house. It wasn't the gray sedan from last time. It was a black SUV. From the vehicle, Brian got out, along with another man I didn't know. This one was older, maybe about 50, dressed in a white shirt and dress pants. He carried a professional briefcase. He looked like a lawyer or an accountant. I didn't go out to greet them. I stayed inside and watched them from the window. Brian knocked on the door, waited, knocked again. I didn't open. Then he did something that confirmed all my suspicions. He pulled a set of keys from his pocket. Keys he shouldn't have. Keys Ashley had probably copied before I changed the locks on my city house. But these keys were different. They were the keys to this house, to the beach house. He tried to open the door but couldn't. I had changed that lock too, 2 days prior, out of pure intuition. Brian looked frustrated. He spoke to the other man. They walked around the property, testing the windows. I called Mr. Henderson immediately. I whispered what was happening. He told me not to open the door under any circumstances, to call the local police if they tried to enter by force, that he was on his way, but it would take an hour to get there from the city. Brian and the unknown man finally gave up on the windows. They returned to the front of the house, and Brian shouted my name. He said he knew I was inside, that they just wanted to talk, that they had brought a notary to make things easier for me, that if I signed the papers today, everything would be faster and simpler, that they had found an excellent buyer offering $550,000 in cash, that the money would be mine, that they would only help manage it so I wouldn't have to worry. I didn't respond. I kept recording everything from my phone, from the security cameras. Brian was getting nervous. The notary, if he really was one, looked at his watch impatiently. Then Brian said something that revealed the whole plan to me. He said out loud, as if speaking to me, but knowing I was listening, that Ashley was very worried about me, that they had consulted with doctors, that at my age it was normal to start having mental confusion. That's why they had brought the notary, to certify that I was in full faculties when I signed the sale, but that if I didn't cooperate, if I kept behaving irrationally, they would have to take other measures, legal measures to protect me from myself. There it was, the direct threat. If I didn't sell voluntarily, they would try to declare me incompetent. They would try to take control of my own life, using the law as a weapon. I felt something I had never felt toward my own family. I felt disgust, not sadness, not disappointment, pure disgust. They waited 20 more minutes. Then they left. But before getting into the SUV, Brian left an envelope taped to my door. I didn't go out to get it until I was completely sure they were gone. Inside the envelope was a purchase agreement already drafted. The seller was me. The buyer was a company called Pacific Family Investments. I looked up the name on the internet. It was a company registered less than 2 months ago. The registered owners were Brian and Ashley. They wanted to buy my house for $550,000 when Sarah had said it was worth $600,000. And the worst part wasn't that. The worst part was that in the fine print of the contract, it said the payment would be made in installments over 5 years. 5 years of monthly payments that they could suspend at any moment if they considered I wasn't using the money appropriately. It was theft disguised as protection. When Mr. Henderson arrived, I showed him everything. The contract, the videos. I told him about the power of attorney document I had found in my city house. He read every paper with that serious expression I already knew. Then he looked at me and told me that what we had here was clear evidence of attempted fraud. He told me we could proceed legally against them. But he also warned me that legal processes against family were long, painful, and public. He asked me what I wanted to do, if I wanted to sue or if I just wanted to protect myself and keep my distance. I told him I didn't know yet, that I needed to think. But what I did know was that I wasn't going to sign anything, that I wasn't going to yield an inch of what was mine. Mr. Henderson nodded. He told me that in the meantime, he would prepare all the necessary documentation to prove my mental capacity, that he would get medical evaluations, that he would build a legal wall so solid that no judge could declare that I wasn't capable of managing my own affairs. The ocean looked dark from my porch while I processed everything that had happened. I understood something fundamental. Ashley hadn't excluded me from Christmas out of carelessness or anger. She had excluded me because it was easier to rob someone when that someone isn't around, when that someone is isolated, when that someone doesn't have witnesses to their lucidity and strength. But they had made a mistake. They had assumed I was the same woman as before, the one who yielded, the one who sacrificed herself, the one who never said no. That woman didn't exist anymore. And very soon they were going to discover who had taken her place. The following days, I dedicated to strengthening my defenses. Mr. Henderson got me an appointment with a renowned geriatrician in the city, Dr. Stevens, a specialist in mental capacity evaluations. I went to his office on a Tuesday morning. He was a man of about 70, with a calm voice and a gaze that seemed to see beyond words. He gave me memory tests, logical reasoning tests, verbal comprehension tests. He asked me about my life, about my recent decisions, about why I had bought the beach house. I told him everything. I didn't omit anything. I spoke to him about the exclusion at Christmas, the unexpected visits, the attempts to make me sign documents. He listened without interrupting, taking occasional notes. At the end of the evaluation, which lasted almost 3 hours, he handed me an official document. In it, he certified that I was in full use of my mental faculties, that my decisions were coherent and well-founded, that I showed no signs of cognitive deterioration or confusion. He told me something I will never forget. He told me that lucidity is not measured by how much you yield to others, but by how well you defend what is yours. With that document in hand, I returned to the beach house. I felt safer, more prepared. But I also knew this wasn't over. Ashley and Brian weren't the type to give up easily. They had invested time and money in their plan. They weren't going to abandon it just because I had changed locks and gotten a paper from a doctor. A full week passed in silence. Too much silence. That stillness made me more nervous than the surprise visits. It was like being in the eye of a hurricane, knowing that at any moment the walls of wind were going to close in on me. I checked the security cameras several times a day. Every car that passed down my street put me on alert. Every unknown call accelerated my pulse. Then, one Friday afternoon, I received a text message from a number I didn't have saved. The message was short and direct. It said Ashley needed to see me urgently, that it was about something important related to one of the kids' health, that please, come to her house tonight. My first instinct was to worry, my grandkids. But then I read the message again and noticed something strange. It didn't say which child. It didn't specify what kind of health problem. It just used the word urgent as bait. I didn't reply. Instead, I called the school where my grandkids studied directly. I communicated with the nurse's office pretending to be a concerned grandmother. They confirmed that both children had attended normally all week, that no health problems had been reported. It was a lie. Another manipulation. They were using the kids as bait to make me go to them. I blocked the number. But 20 minutes later, another message arrived. This time from Ashley's phone. This one was more aggressive. It said I was being selfish. That I was putting the whole family's well-being at risk due to my stubbornness. That if I really cared about my grandkids, I would sell the properties I didn't need to help secure their future. That they were going through economic difficulties, and that I, who had 2 houses, wasn't willing to sacrifice one to support them. There was the truth. It wasn't about protecting me. It wasn't about simplifying my life. It was about money. It was about them having financial problems and deciding my properties were the solution. I took screenshots of the messages and sent them to Mr. Henderson. He replied immediately. He told me those messages were evidence of emotional extortion, to keep them all, not to reply. But the messages didn't stop. 4 more arrived that night, each one more desperate than the last. In the final one, Ashley wrote something that hurt me more than I expected. She wrote that after everything she had endured being my daughter, after all the years putting up with me, the least I could do was help her now that she needed it. Endured, putting up with me. As if my presence in her life had been a burden. As if having raised her, educated her, loved her had been a sacrifice she had to tolerate. I turned off the phone and put it in a drawer. I went out to the porch and sat in the rocking chair. The sea was choppy that night. The waves hit the shore with force. The wind brought the smell of a storm, and I stayed there, rocking slowly, letting the sound of the water drown out all the poisonous thoughts Ashley's messages had planted in my head. The next morning, when I turned on the phone, I found 12 missed calls, all from Ashley, all between 2 and 5 in the morning. There were no voicemails, just the insistence, the need, the desperation of someone losing control of a situation they thought they had mastered. I decided to take the initiative. I called Mr. Henderson and asked him to draft a legal document, a cease and desist order, a formal letter where I made it clear that I did not authorize any sale of my properties, that any attempt to forge my signature or act on my behalf would be legally prosecuted, and requesting that Ashley and Brian stop contacting me regarding matters related to my assets. Mr. Henderson told me it was a strong measure, that once I sent that letter, the conflict would become official. I told him I knew, that I wanted it official. The letter was sent via certified mail on Monday. Ashley would receive it Tuesday. I prepared for what would come next, because I knew something would come. Desperate people don't stop with legal warnings. Desperate people escalate. Wednesday morning, while drinking coffee on my porch, I saw the same black SUV from last time parking in front of my house. But this time, more people were coming. Brian got out of the driver's seat, Ashley from the passenger side. And from the back seat, 2 more people got out. A young man in a gray suit and an older woman carrying a medical bag. I felt my stomach churn. Mr. Henderson had warned me about this possibility. He had told me that if they couldn't convince me to sell voluntarily, the next step would be to try to declare me legally incompetent. And for that, they needed witnesses. They needed people to certify that I wasn't well, that I couldn't make decisions, that I needed a legal guardian. I didn't leave the house. I called Mr. Henderson immediately. He was already on his way. He had anticipated something like this might happen after sending the cease and desist letter. He told me to keep the doors locked, to record everything, not to say a single word without him present. Ashley knocked on the door. Her voice sounded worried, almost tearful. She shouted my name. She said she had brought a doctor to evaluate me, that they just wanted to make sure I was okay, that lately I had been behaving strangely, that they had received reports from neighbors saying they saw me confused. Lies, all lies. But lies spoken with such conviction that if someone listened without knowing the context, they might seem true. The man in the gray suit identified himself as a social worker. He said he had an obligation to verify the well-being of older adults when receiving reports of possible neglect or deterioration. I shouted from inside that I hadn't requested any evaluation, that I wasn't going to open the door, that my lawyer was on his way. He insisted. He said that if I didn't cooperate, that could be interpreted as evidence of mental alteration. The trap was perfectly designed. If I opened up and talked to them, they could twist my words. If I didn't open, they could say I was paranoid and confused. I was trapped in a game where every move could be used against me. Then I saw something that gave me hope. A familiar car coming up the road. It was Tom. He had returned to town for a few days to pick up the last things from his old house. He approached the group in front of my door and asked what was happening. Ashley tried to explain it was a family matter. Tom interrupted her. He said he was a neighbor, that he knew me well, that I was perfectly lucid, and that if they tried to force entry into my property, he would call the police. The social worker seemed baffled. He wasn't expecting witnesses. Ashley tried to discredit Tom, saying he barely knew me. But Tom took out his phone and showed messages we had exchanged for weeks. Coherent conversations, plans for the garden, book recommendations, nothing indicating confusion or deterioration. Just then, Mr. Henderson arrived. He stepped out of his car with a folder full of documents. He introduced himself formally as my legal representative. He showed them Dr. Stevens' evaluation. He showed them my updated deeds. He showed them the cease and desist letter they had received and were violating by showing up at my property. The social worker reviewed the papers. The woman with the medical bag said nothing. Brian and Ashley exchanged panicked looks. Their plan was crumbling in front of them, and there was nothing they could do except retreat. Mr. Henderson didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He spoke with that professional calm only experienced lawyers have. That calm which makes it clear that every word is backed by laws and real consequences. He explained to the social worker and the woman with the medical bag that they were being used in an attempted family fraud, that my daughter and son-in-law had fabricated false reports to try to declare me incompetent with the sole purpose of appropriating my assets. The social worker went pale. He asked if that was true. He looked at Ashley, expecting an answer. She tried to maintain her composure, but her voice came out trembling. She said she was only worried about me, that they didn't understand the full situation, that I had changed, that I had become distant and suspicious. Mr. Henderson interrupted her. He took out his phone and showed screenshots of the messages Ashley had sent me. The messages demanding I sell my properties. The messages threatening to take control of my life if I didn't cooperate. The woman with the medical bag closed her portfolio and took a step back. She told Ashley she didn't participate in these types of situations, that if they wanted a legitimate evaluation, they should follow the appropriate channels with a court order, that she wasn't going to risk her professional license in a shady family conflict. She walked toward her own car parked further back. She didn't look back. The social worker also apologized. He said he had acted in good faith based on the report presented to him. Mr. Henderson handed him a copy of Dr. Stevens' evaluation and asked him to attach it to any file they had opened on me. The man nodded, took the document, and also withdrew. Only Brian, Ashley, Mr. Henderson, Tom, and I remained on the other side of the door. The silence was long and heavy. Finally, Brian spoke. His tone had changed completely. It was no longer authoritative or condescending. It was almost pleading. He said it had all been a misunderstanding, that they only wanted the best for me, that maybe they had rushed things, but it all came from a place of love and concern. Mr. Henderson didn't let him continue. He told him we had documented multiple violations, attempted misappropriation, falsifying reports to social services, harassment, emotional extortion, that if they approached my property again, contacted me, or attempted any legal action related to my assets, he would proceed with a formal lawsuit and request a restraining order. Ashley finally exploded. She screamed that I was her mother, that she had a right to worry about me. How was it possible that I believed strangers more than my own blood? That after everything she had done for me, this was how I repaid her? I opened the door at that moment. I stepped out onto the porch and looked her directly in the eye. I asked her what exactly she had done for me, to name one single thing she had done for me in the last 10 years that hadn't been because she needed something in return. Silence. I reminded her that I paid for her college, that I helped with her wedding, that I took care of her kids when she needed time for her career, that I was always there, and I asked her where she had been when I needed her. Where had she been at Christmas, when I was left alone without understanding why I had been erased from her life? Ashley didn't answer. She had tears in her eyes, but I didn't know if they were from frustration or shame. Brian took her by the arm, trying to lead her back to the SUV. But before leaving, she said something that revealed the whole truth. She said they had enormous debts, that they had invested in a business that failed, that the bank was going to take their house, that they needed that money not because they were greedy, but because they were desperate, that if I really loved them, I would help. I told her that if they had come to me with honesty from the beginning, if they had asked for help instead of trying to rob me, maybe things would be different. But they came with lies, with manipulation, trying to declare me incompetent, trying to take everything I had worked to build, and that wasn't desperation. That was betrayal. They left. The black SUV disappeared down the road, kicking up dust. Tom put his hand on my shoulder in a silent gesture of support. Mr. Henderson asked if I was okay. I told him yes, that for the first time in a long time, I was okay. But he warned me that this probably wasn't the end, that desperate people do unpredictable things, that I should stay alert. I told him I knew, that I would be prepared. Tom offered to stay a few more days in town, to keep watch, to be available if I needed anything. I accepted gratefully. The following days were strangely quiet, too quiet. There were no calls, no messages, no more visits. It was as if Ashley and Brian had disappeared completely. Mr. Henderson told me that sometimes that happened, that when plans failed spectacularly, people retreated to regroup or to accept defeat. But I knew my daughter better than anyone, and I knew she didn't accept defeat easily. She had inherited my stubbornness, only she used it for very different ends. So I waited. I kept the cameras on. I kept my phone close. I kept Mr. Henderson's number on speed dial, and I lived every day as if it were the last before the storm. A week later, on a Thursday afternoon, while I was watering the plants in the front garden, I saw an unknown car approaching slowly down the street. It wasn't Brian's SUV. It was a silver sedan. It stopped in front of my house, but no one got out immediately. It just stayed there, engine running. I put down the hose and went into the house. I grabbed my phone and opened the camera app. From there I could see who was in that car. It was Sarah, the real estate agent who had come the first time with Ashley. She was alone, checking something on her phone. Then she looked toward my house. Our gazes met through the camera, even though she couldn't see me. After a few minutes, she got out of the car. She was holding a folder. She walked to my door and knocked. This time, I did go out. Sarah seemed uncomfortable. She apologized for showing up without notice, said she needed to talk to me, that she had discovered some things about Ashley and Brian she thought I should know. I asked her why I should trust her. She told me I didn't have to, but that she had also been used, and she didn't like that. I told her to speak. Sarah told me Ashley had contacted her 2 months before that first visit, that she had told her that her mother had memory problems and the family had decided to sell some properties to pay for her care, that everything was voluntary, that I was on board. Sarah had no reason to doubt. She had seen similar cases before, but after what happened last time, after seeing how Mr. Henderson presented all those documents proving I was perfectly capable, Sarah started investigating on her own. She discovered that Ashley and Brian didn't just have debts. They had lawsuits. 3 different creditors were pursuing them legally. One of them had placed a preliminary lien on their house. They were on the brink of total bankruptcy. And then Sarah discovered something worse. She opened her folder and showed me a document. It was another purchase agreement, but this one wasn't for my beach house. It was for my house in the city, the house where I had lived for 25 years, the house I had shared with my husband, my home. Ashley and Brian planned to sell both properties, not just one, both, and leave me with nothing. My hands trembled as I held the document Sarah had handed me. The contract was dated 3 weeks ago, just when Ashley had called me for the first time asking about my properties. The buyer listed was the same, Pacific Family Investments, Brian and Ashley's shell company. The sale price for my city house was listed as $400,000, almost $100,000 below its real value, and the payment conditions were even worse than the first contract. Installments over 10 years with variable interest controlled by them. I asked Sarah how she got this document. She explained that Brian had contacted her 2 days ago, before he knew their plan had failed. He had emailed her the contract asking her to review it, to calculate her commissions, to have everything ready for when I finally signed. Brian was so sure they were going to succeed in declaring me incompetent that he had already started distributing the sale documents. Sarah told me she wasn't going to be part of this, that she had come to warn me because no one deserved to be stripped bare by their own family like that. She handed me the entire folder. Inside were copies of all the emails between her, Ashley, and Brian. Conversations where they discussed how to convince me, where they planned to use the excuse of my age to pressure me, where they calculated how much money they would get after selling both properties and paying their debts. I thanked her. I told her this was exactly what I needed. She nodded, gave me her personal card in case I needed her to testify about anything, and left. I watched her drive away, feeling a strange mix of gratitude and horror. Gratitude because now I had irrefutable proof of Ashley's intentions. Horror because those proofs confirmed that my own daughter had planned to literally leave me on the street. I called Mr. Henderson immediately. He arrived in less than an hour. He reviewed every paper, every email, every detail of the plan. His expression grew more serious with every page. When he finished, he looked at me and said something I'll never forget. He said that in his 30 years of legal practice, he had seen many cases of financial abuse against the elderly, but that few were as calculated, as cold, as completely devoid of empathy as this one. He asked what I wanted to do. If I wanted to proceed with formal legal action, sue them, seek real consequences. I told him I needed time to think, that Ashley was still my daughter, that the kids were still my grandkids, that a lawsuit would destroy any possibility that things could ever be repaired. Mr. Henderson didn't pressure me. He just reminded me that while I decided, they remained an active threat. That night I stayed up late sitting on the porch. The sea was calm. The stars shone with a clarity I never saw in the city. I thought about all the years I had dedicated to building a family, about all the nights I had stayed up when Ashley was a baby, about all the times I had sacrificed something I wanted to give her, something she needed. And I wondered at what exact moment she had stopped seeing me as her mother and started seeing me as a resource she could exploit. I didn't find a clear answer. Maybe there never was a specific moment. Maybe it had been a gradual deterioration, a slow distancing where I had been reduced to my utility. And now that I had decided to stop being useful on her terms, I had simply ceased to exist for her, except as an obstacle between her and my money. The next morning I made a decision. I wasn't going to sue, not yet, but I wasn't going to sit waiting for the next attack either. I was going to take complete control of the situation. I called Mr. Henderson and asked him to prepare additional documents, a formal will clearly specifying the destination of all my properties, a medical directive designating Mr. Henderson, not Ashley, as my representative in case of incapacity, and a sworn affidavit documenting everything that had happened. Mr. Henderson helped me with every step. Everything was notarized. Everything was filed in secure places. I gave copies to Tom with instructions that if something happened to me, if I turned up dead or incapacitated in a suspicious way, he was to hand everything to the authorities immediately. Tom accepted without asking questions. He told me he hoped never to have to use those documents, but he would guard them as if his life depended on it. I also did something else. I hired a private investigator. I asked him to find out everything about Ashley and Brian's debts. I wanted to know exactly what I was facing. How much did they owe? To whom? And how desperate were they really? The investigator handed me his report a week later. It was worse than Sarah had told me. Ashley and Brian owed $2.5 million between credit cards, personal loans, and a failed commercial loan. Their house had a second mortgage they couldn't pay. They had 2 luxury cars on finance that were about to be repossessed. And they had just received a lawsuit from a business partner claiming fraud in the failed business they had set up. They were completely broke. And selling my 2 properties would barely cover half of what they owed. That meant that even if they had managed to steal everything from me, it wouldn't have been enough to save them. It would have only prolonged their fall. And they would have left me with nothing in the process. That revelation freed me from the last shred of guilt I felt. Because now I understood that helping them wasn't a real option. Not when the problem was that big. Not when they had reached that point through irresponsible decisions I couldn't control or reverse. I kept the investigator's report along with all the other documents. And I waited. Because I knew Ashley hadn't given up, that at some point, when the pressure from her creditors became unbearable, she would try something else, something desperate, and this time, I would be completely prepared. The final attack arrived 3 weeks later, a Tuesday at 9 in the morning. I was at the beach house making coffee when the security cameras alerted me to movement in the driveway. I opened the app expecting to see maybe the mailman or a neighbor. But what I saw froze my blood. It was Ashley. And she didn't come alone. She came with Brian, with Sarah again, and with 2 men wearing uniforms from a moving company. I went out to the porch before they could knock on the door. I asked them what they were doing there. Ashley looked at me with an expression attempting to be compassionate, but only managing to appear condescending. She told me they had made a difficult but necessary decision, that they had gotten a judge to review my case, that they had an order to temporarily move me to a geriatric evaluation center while my legal capacity was determined. A lie. I knew it immediately. Mr. Henderson had explained that those types of orders weren't issued without prior hearings, without independent evaluations, without formal notification. I asked her to show me the alleged court order. Ashley hesitated. Brian pulled a folded paper from his pocket. He handed it to me. I opened it and read it quickly. It wasn't a court order, it was a letter from a lawyer they had hired requesting a capacity evaluation. A request is not an order. It had no legal power. I told him that wasn't valid, that they had no right to be there. Brian changed tactics. He said that if I didn't cooperate voluntarily, they would have to call Adult Protective Services, that they would report I was living alone in inadequate conditions, that I was refusing medical care, that I represented a danger to myself. More lies piled upon lies. I took out my phone and dialed Mr. Henderson's number. I put it on speaker. Mr. Henderson answered on the second ring. I quickly explained what was happening. He spoke directly to Ashley and Brian. He told them they were committing multiple crimes: trespassing, attempted kidnapping, forgery of legal documents, that if they didn't leave my property immediately, he would call the police and file formal charges. Sarah took a step back. She looked completely confused. She asked Ashley and Brian if they had lied to her again. Ashley tried to calm her, but Sarah had had enough. She told them she didn't participate in illegal activities, that if they contacted her again, she would end up reporting them to the licensing board and the proper authorities. She walked toward her car, leaving them standing there. The men from the moving company also looked uncomfortable. One of them asked Brian if they really had legal authorization to be doing this. Brian didn't answer. The man looked at his partner, and both returned to their truck. They said without official documentation they weren't moving anything. They left too. Only Ashley, Brian, and I remained. The silence was dense and long. Finally, Brian exploded. He screamed that I was being ridiculous, that they were my family, that they had a right to take care of me, that I was acting like a crazy, selfish old woman who preferred to waste her money on a useless beach house instead of helping her own blood. Mr. Henderson was still on speaker, listening to everything. He warned them that every word they were saying was being recorded, that the security cameras were capturing everything, that it was already enough evidence to proceed legally. Brian realized his mistake. He took Ashley by the arm and tried to lead her back to the car, but Ashley pulled away. She looked me directly in the face and said something that finally revealed who she really was. She said I had never been a good mother, that I had always been controlling and manipulative, that everything I had done for her as a child I had done to feel superior, to keep her in eternal debt, that she deserved those properties because she had had to put up with me her whole life, that if I really loved her, I would give her what she needed without thinking twice. I didn't answer. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I finally understood that there was nothing I could say that would change what she had decided to believe. Ashley had rewritten our entire history to justify what she was doing. I had gone from being the mother who loved her to being her oppressor who owed her something. And that false narrative was the only thing allowing her to sleep at night while planning to rob me. Mr. Henderson gave them an ultimatum through the phone. He told them they had 30 seconds to leave my property, or he was hanging up and calling the police. He told them this was the last warning, that if they approached me again, if they tried to contact me, if they made any move related to my assets, he would proceed with a formal lawsuit and request permanent restraining orders. They left. Ashley was crying, but they were tears of rage, not sadness. Brian pushed her into the car almost by force. They peeled out, tires screeching. I watched them disappear down the road for the last time. Mr. Henderson asked me if I was okay. I told him yes. He asked if I was now ready to proceed legally. I told him yes. That I had seen enough. That I had tried everything. That nothing remained but to protect myself completely. Mr. Henderson told me he would prepare all the necessary documents. Civil lawsuit for attempted fraud. Request for restraining orders. Report to the authorities regarding the attempted kidnapping, disguised as a medical transfer. Everything we had documented for weeks would finally be used. We hung up. I stood on the porch feeling something strange. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't relief. It was a kind of void where before there had existed the hope that maybe, somehow, things could be fixed. That hope had died completely. And in its place remained only clarity. The cold clarity of knowing exactly who my daughter was, and knowing exactly what I had to do to protect myself from her. The legal documents were filed a week later. Mr. Henderson handled everything with the precision of someone who had waited for this moment from the start. The civil lawsuit included every documented attempt at fraud, every threatening text, every unauthorized visit, every lie told to professionals to try to declare me incompetent. The restraining orders were requested for both Ashley and Brian. They couldn't come within 100 yards of any of my properties. They couldn't contact me by any means. Any violation would result in immediate arrest. Ashley tried to answer the lawsuit with her own lawyer. They argued it had all been a misunderstanding, that she had only acted out of inverted maternal concern, out of filial love, but the evidence was overwhelming. The camera videos, the emails Sarah had provided, Dr. Stevens' testimony, the private investigator's report showing their deaths, the fake power of attorney document they had left in my house. Everything painted a very clear picture of criminal intent, not family concern. The judge reviewed the case in a preliminary hearing. I was present with Mr. Henderson by my side. Ashley and Brian were on the other side of the room with their lawyer. We didn't look at each other once during the entire session. The judge read the documents in silence, asked a few questions, reviewed the videos, then he dictated his resolution. The restraining orders were granted immediately. The civil lawsuit would proceed to trial. And furthermore, he referred the case to the district attorney's office to investigate possible criminal charges for attempted fraud and forgery of documents. I left that courtroom feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't victory. It was simply the absence of fear. I no longer had to look over my shoulder. I no longer had to check the cameras every hour. I no longer had to wonder when the next attack would come. The legal walls Mr. Henderson had built around me were solid. I was protected. I returned to my beach house that same afternoon. Tom had returned to town permanently. He had decided he missed the sea, that the city up north wasn't for him. We became official neighbors and true friends. We walked on the beach in the afternoons. We talked about books, politics, life. He never asked me details about what had happened with Ashley. He just told me once that the family one chooses is always stronger than the family one gets by accident. Months passed. The civil lawsuit was settled out of court. Ashley and Brian didn't have the resources to fight a case they were clearly going to lose. They signed an agreement where they acknowledged their attempt at misappropriation, waived any future claim on my assets, and agreed to pay my legal defense costs. It wasn't much money. They didn't have much to give. But the principle was important. The formal recognition of what they had tried to do was permanently recorded. The criminal charges were less severe than Mr. Henderson expected. The DA offered a probation deal in exchange for admitting to a lesser offense. Ashley and Brian accepted it. They didn't go to prison. But now they had a record. And that meant if they ever tried something similar with another person, the consequences would be much graver. I never spoke to Ashley again. She tried to send me a letter 6 months after everything ended. The letter arrived through Mr. Henderson because she couldn't contact me directly due to the restraining order. He asked me if I wanted to read it. I told him no, to keep it in the case file in case it was ever needed as evidence. But that I didn't need to read her excuses or her justifications or whatever she had written there. My grandkids reached ages I couldn't celebrate with them. That hurt. It probably always will. but I understood that protecting myself meant accepting those losses. I couldn't have a relationship with the kids without having contact with Ashley. And contact with Ashley was dangerous. Simple as that. Sad as that. Necessary as that. My life became smaller, but more authentic. I no longer had a big family, but I had real friends. I had my house facing the ocean. I had my quiet mornings and my afternoons reading. I had honest conversations with people who valued me for who I was, not for what they could get from me. And I discovered that was enough. More than enough. One afternoon, almost a year after everything, I was sitting on my porch watching the sunset when Tom approached with 2 cups of tea. He sat next to me in silence. After a while, he asked if I ever regretted buying this house. Regretted taking that decision at Christmas that changed everything. I told him no, that this house had saved my life. Not literally, but in every sense that mattered. He asked what I would tell someone going through something similar, someone being used or manipulated by family. I thought about that for a long moment. Then I told him I would say this: that real love never makes you feel small. That real family never treats you like a resource. That it's okay to set boundaries even when it hurts. That it's okay to choose yourself when no one else does. And that it is never, ever too late to start over. Tom nodded. We drank our tea in silence while the sun sank into the ocean, painting the sky orange and violet. The waves broke softly on the shore. A seagull crossed the horizon, and I realized something important. I realized I was happy, not in spite of everything that had happened, but precisely because it had happened, because it had forced me to find my own strength, because it had taught me my own value, because it had freed me from the need to be loved by people who would never love me the way I deserved. Ashley thought she could exclude me from Christmas and then steal my life piece by piece. She thought I was weak, that I was naive, that I was easy to manipulate. She never imagined I had a brilliant lawyer, cameras recording every move, documents proving my sanity, and a loyal neighbor who would become my chosen family. She never imagined the submissive mother she knew would find her backbone. And she definitely never imagined I would learn to live better without her than with her. That was my real victory. Not winning the lawsuit, not getting the restraining orders. My victory was discovering that I was enough, that my life had value even without the title of active mother or grandmother, that I could build something beautiful with what I had left instead of crying for what I lost. The ocean was still there every morning when I woke up. The sun kept rising, and I kept choosing myself, over and over again, every day, without guilt, without apologies, simply living the life I deserved from the beginning.